So watching GTV Breakfast. Time for us to have a conversation now. And he was a senator of all eyes. He delivered lectures on the economy, pointing out the inefficiencies of the first John Mahama administration. He became the reference on how to point out the foibles of a government. Based on that, the people of Ghana voted massively for the Nana Akufo-Addo-led government into office in 2016. Dr. Bawumia became the vice president, a position he held for 8 years. There are those who believe he has been the most effective vice president in Ghana's history. He contested and won the NPP primaries and thus became the presidential candidate for the 2024 general elections. Unfortunately, he lost the elections, and just like his boss, Donaldo, the other political figures, he has not given up the fight. Dr. Bawumia is not relenting. We have in the studios Lawyer Akbar Yusuf Uhola Khomeini, who is an aide to Dr. Bawumia, to tell us more about the vision of the former vice president for the country. Good morning once again,
and you're welcome. How are you, my brother?
I'm also good. You're looking good.
Thank you.
How's the campaign trail treating you?
Well, so far so good. Barely less than 60 days to the election. So we're trying to ramp up the campaign. He's visited more than half of the country so far. The last was in the eastern region, and the support was massive.
The feedback is good?
Very, very good. Very, very good. From the regions he's visited so far, we've seen a certain trend. Members of parliament, constituency executives, polling station executives, electoral area coordinators, indeed, former constituency executives, parliamentary aspirants, former members of parliament, district chief executives, former DCs, all publicly declaring support for him and believing that he's the right candidate to lead the NPP to victory in 2028. So it's been quite massive, in terms of the sentiments within the party.
So it looks like the message is resonated. It's like they love the message.
The message has resonated very, very well. The acceptance of the fact that we lost in 2024 because we got certain things wrong. The recognition that we've got to take steps to correct some of these things going into 2028, and his idea on restructuring the welfare system within the party to make sure that those who work for the party are rewarded, for their services to the party. All of these things, are exciting the base of the party, and that is why in the regions that he's visited so far, the support has been massive.
Yeah, and speaking about taking steps to restore what you once had, in the sense that just last week you released an amended constitution, and it's like one of the key things that a lot of people notice is you want to help you get power back in 2028. You need to do all these things, and some of the steps being taken is including the fact that you amended the NPP constitution.
Absolutely. So after the defeat in 2024, the party constituted the Michael Quay Committee to go around the country to listen to the party people, what could have occasioned the defeat in 2024. One of the major concerns within the grassroots of the party was the nature of our constitution, especially the electoral college of the party. The general consensus was that there was a need for the party to take steps to expand the electoral college to capture in more of the base of the party in the decision-making process. The reality is that if people feel part of the decision-making process, they are much more motivated and willing to stand up to the values and principles of the party and to defend the party at all times. So the Michael Quay Committee recommended constitutional amendments, if you recall. So the party convened here in Accra at the University of Ghana to deliberate on the proposals that came from all the 276 constituencies of our country, adopted, a lot of the proposals and amended some critical provisions of the party. So the party, a few days ago, launched the amended constitution and to signal to the rank and file of the party that the party is ready and prepared to work with some of these new ideas.
It's spoken to us, we've heard you, and we've made that
absolutely, to enhance the fortunes of the party in 2028.
Yeah, but it's whenever I watch political leaders or those who have the opportunity to be in such positions, it's like after a defeat like the one in 2024 elections, maybe personally I would just be just go and hide my tail or something like that, but it's like something keeps pushing them, they have this drive that keeps bringing them to want to lead the country. You're an aide to the former Vice President, Dr. Bawumia. What would you say is that reason? What is the main aim? What is driving him to pursue this?
You know, for those who are concerned about the well-being of their country, you don't give up, all right? The country has an aspiration, and that aspiration is to be a developed, prosperous nation, a nation that looks after its citizens, a nation that creates opportunities for young people to be able to fulfill their ambitions. So with these aspirations, every citizen has a responsibility to contribute to the realization of that aspiration. And so therefore, you cannot give up. To give up means it's to surrender these aspirations. You know, and so if you look at not just Dr. Bawumia, but for many people who have pursued these ambitions, the overall objective is to contribute to that dream, is to contribute to the progress of our nation. And so if you believe that your ideas would help propel the nation into that developed status, you don't give up because you suffered, you know, a single defeat. Yeah. Now, if you look at what motivates Dr. Bawumia, and I tell you, you have to go back and look at his book titled Monetary Policy and Financial Sector Reform in Africa, the Ghana Experience. You know, in that book, he discusses monetary policy generally across Africa and what African governments ought to do in order to propel their economies from low-income economies into high-income economies. He listed a number of ideas that he believed Ghana should adopt and implement in order to realize our full potential as a nation. Now, that book gives you an idea of what he hopes Ghana would become. Yeah. Okay, and so he believes that to be able to effect these changes, the political platform is crucial, because sometimes you've got to be the one holding the power, all right, and dictating the pace of national policy, okay, and implementing your vision that you believe would help transform our country. Okay. And so that book provides the foundational framework of his vision for Ghana. So he says, for instance, that, you know, for us to be able to develop as a nation, we first of all would have to attain and sustain macroeconomic stability. You know, the problem with our country, all right, and it cuts across all regimes. Okay. If you look at the fiscal history of our country, so Dr. Bawumia emphasizes on two words: to attain and sustain. Yeah. The problem has not been the attainment of macroeconomic stability. Oh, and so if you look at stability? Exactly. So if you look at our fiscal history, virtually every government at one point in time has attained macroeconomic stability. You know, high GDP growth, low inflationary rate, some semblance of exchange rate stability, you know, and all of that. The biggest problem, the biggest problem has been the ability to sustain it for a longer period. So governments would attain it, and within few years, we're back to an IMF program because we're unable to sustain the macroeconomic environment. And that's why since 1957, we've been to the IMF for 17 times. So Dr. Bawumia believes that to be able to truly transform our country, we just don't have to attain macroeconomic stability, we have to sustain it. The question then becomes, how do we sustain it? Yeah. So he provides the pillars upon which his vision rests.
And yes, we would love to know the key pillars of Dr. Bawumia's vision and how perhaps he plans to implement them.
So for instance, he argues that there's the need, first of all, for government to reduce its expenditure. Okay, the biggest problem we have faced has been central government trying to do everything in the face of limited financial capacity. So our governments build the roads, they build the schools, they build the hospitals, all the infrastructure needs of our country. But you know that these needs are humongous. You know, it's supposed to build roads throughout the country, build hospitals, build schools. You know, in a country where less than 2 million people are formally captured in the tax bracket. So it is not sustainable. And so therefore you're going to have a cycle of debt trap, okay, that will require you to borrow more and borrow more and borrow more to fund some of these infrastructure. Dr. Bawumia believes that to get out of it, government must reduce its participation in the provision of critical infrastructure. All right? For years we have spoken about the private sector being the engine of economic growth, but it is more a rhetoric than a reality. Dr. Bawumia believes that it is time to give true meaning to this statement by allowing the private sector to fully participate in the provision of critical infrastructure on public-private partnership basis. So you're going to have a situation.
Some will argue that that's the job of government to provide this critical infrastructure.
No. It is a job of government to create conditions to attract the private sector to be willing to invest in the provision of critical infrastructure.
Okay.
Because in many developed countries, intercity roads are owned by private companies, and they're told, all right, so government will not be required to look for the money to say to
repair a road that needs the hospitals and stuff like
that. Okay. Schools are built and rented. Public housing is provided by the private sector. For instance, in Singapore, we can also leverage private sector capital to be able to do this. And Dr. Bawumia argues that if we were to do that successfully, we would be addressing a twin problem. First, we'll be reducing government spending in the provision of this critical infrastructure. Second, we'll be empowering the private sector and in the process delivering jobs. Because if you have a flourishing private sector economy, you're going to have job opportunities for the thousands of young graduates that we produce every year. But because of the appetite of government willing to do everything in the face of limited resources, government is unable to deliver jobs. And since 1957, we've had to grapple with the issue of unemployment. That's number one. So he believes that the private sector should lead the way in the provision of critical infrastructure. And he argues that that will free for the government at least 3% of our GDP, which in his opinion is huge to spur up private sector growth. He also argues that to be able to deliver that prosperity that we desire, we should fundamentally address the problem of cost of living.
Okay, cost of living.
We cannot deny that cost of living has been a perennial problem in our country. So you have a situation where you are dealing with unemployment, people cannot find jobs, and in addition, cost of living is skyrocketing on a daily basis.
If you do have a job, you're unable to afford certain amenities.
You and I live in Accra. We know the cost of rent, we know the cost of transportation, we know the cost of electricity. And indeed, between 2016 and 2022, for instance, global inflation has increased from 1.5% to 8.7%. That's about fivefold. And so no wonder the world is faced with the cost of living crisis. And Dr. Bawumia believes that to be able to address the cost of living crisis in Ghana, there are 4 critical areas that government must focus on, because these are the drivers of the cost of living. Food, all right? Transportation costs, energy costs, and rent. So therefore, to be able to address these problems, government would have to scale up investment in agriculture in order to bring food prices down.
Are those part of the 4 reasons, or is the food, transport, energy, and rent?
Exactly.
Okay.
So you have to scale up investment in agriculture to be able to reduce the cost of food. You know that cost of food is a serious problem for the Ghanaian people. You buy a pack of food, and it's going around 100 cedis or 150 cedis. All right? It is not a sustainable way of life. All right, so government would have to invest more in agriculture. Government would have to invest in public housing using private capital to be able to deal with the menace
of rent. That's private public
participation. Okay. And Singapore provides an excellent model in dealing with the housing crisis and the rent problem in our country. And then the issue of transport costs. Those who use public transport in our country will tell you that it is so expensive to move from one place to the other in the face of unemployment and low salaries and wages in our public sector. And so therefore you would have to have a mechanism at the state level to address these problems. Dr. Bawumia believes that a shift, okay, from the current public system that relies on fuel-powered vehicles,
okay,
to electric-powered vehicles, in his estimation, will reduce the cost of transport between 30 to 40%. If you look at the public sector pricing formula for public transport in our country, two key variables are responsible for that.
Okay, which are?
The cost of fuel,
okay,
and the cost of spare parts.
Yeah, that's
a
right.
shift into electric vehicles eliminates one critical variable completely, the cost of fuel.
Sure.
All right? Spare parts for such vehicles are much cheaper than fuel-powered vehicles. So in his estimation, that will reduce the cost of public transport between 30 to 40%. And indeed, in 2024, it was experimented. Some electric vehicles were brought in for purposes of public transport. And those who use it will tell you the significant reduction in the cost of their transportation.
But you foresee a fight, between the traditional fuel that we usually buy and this electric?
Of course, there's always going to be competition. But of course, government's duty is to act in the interest of its people. Okay, so in making public policy, you determine which one benefits your people, which policy brings ease to your people, which policy brings convenience to your people, which policy is in your national interest. Because cost of living is certainly not in our national interest. And so government should be willing to pursue policies and programs and initiatives that brings relief to the Ghanaian people. So Dr. Bawumia argues that this is also one critical area that requires investment, that requires visionary leadership in order to be able to deal with the cost of living crisis. But he also believes that in order to encourage and incentivize the private sector, we need to take a second look, and indeed a critical look at our tax regime. Okay? Because if we all agree that the private sector must power growth, that the private sector must deliver jobs, then we must have a tax regime which encourages them to want to invest.
Like some waivers and stuff like that.
Waivers, tax waivers, a flat rate regime. Because you see, it is estimated that revenues of up to 13% of GDP remains uncollected, largely because of the complex nature of our tax regime. Complexities breeds disobedience. Okay, and that's why Dr. Bawumia believes that we've got to reform the system to achieve compliance. And that 13% of revenues vis-a-vis our GDP is estimated to be at $24 billion. If half of that is collected as a result of a reform of our tax regime, it would be a huge game changer for public finances. This $24 billion is not like the phantom oral $21 billion. This is available. And it's as a result of non-compliance with our current tax regime.
Yeah, sorry about that. So speaking about energy, is there any chance perhaps solar will be brought in? Of
course. I mean, I skipped that because he believes that we must have the solar mix in our generation capacity. Solar is quite cheaper, all right, in terms of, the cost to produce. And so you remember he argued that his government would install about 2,000 megawatts of power, all right, into our generation mix in order to bring the cost of electricity down. Because if you, it feeds into his overall vision of a private sector-led nation. Because if you want people to invest in the economy, the cost of doing business must be low. The cost of doing business include the cost of electricity. This year alone, government has increased electricity tariffs by 17%.
The PURC, you mean?
I mean, it's government, all right? That cannot be an incentive to encourage private sector investment. Because if at the end of the day, you use all your profits to pay electricity, you will not be motivated to expand your operations. And because you cannot expand your operations, you are not going to be able to hire people.
So
we must have a government policy that drives the goal of reducing the cost of energy in our country. And all of these things are things that Dr. Bawumia believes we should be able to do.
Yeah, before we move to the tax regime for the private sector, so that in order for them to drive growth, you mentioned something earlier about the rent, because you spoke about food, the transport, the energy, but we didn't talk about how you plan to adjust the rent.
I mean, massive public sector housing modeled along the Singaporean style, but funded by private sector. Okay, so government will provide the incentives. Government would enter into a public-private partnership with private people to build housing across our country, so as to bring, because in the midst of scarcity, you're going to have huge costs to pay. Because when houses are not available, the few ones that are available becomes expensive.
Yeah.
Okay, so you need to be,
for them is
exactly, it's basic economics. So you need to be able to have, the right investment to expand access and to bring down the cost. And he intends to do that through private sector capital.
Well, one thing we know Dr. Bawumia is very fond of, and sometimes you read some of the social media comments, you'll be like, the former vice president is like a geek, sort of, and there's the fact that he always champions digital courses. So what can you tell us about the Digital Ghana agenda?
So the book I reference, so for many people who do not understand his desire to pursue the path of digitization, his earlier book that I referenced, which he published in 2010, and mind you, in 2010 he was not the vice president of the Republic of Ghana, he identified 3 critical things, that we needed to do to formalize our economy and to reap the full benefits of economic integration and growth. Public address system. He stated that in 2010, that the problem of our country is the informal nature of our economy and our society. And so it is very possible for somebody to be born in Ghana, die in Ghana, and be buried in Ghana without central government knowing about the existence of that person. You cannot develop a country with such a system. So as far back as 2010, he argued that there was the urgent need for African economies to adopt a national unique identification systems. All right? Because that unique identification system allows for the formalization of the economy, 1. It allows for the expansion of the tax net, 2. It allows for targeting of development. What we have done in over 60 years is to carry out development in our country without data. So you go to a community and then you assume for them that their number 1 priority is a school. Because
it may not be.
It may not be, because that policy proposal is not informed by any data. So as far back as 2010, he started arguing for this. Then he spoke about financial inclusion, banking the unbanked, using digitization. Indeed, whether we like it or not, the 4th industrial revolution, which is anchored on digitization, is here with us. And therefore countries must begin to prepare themselves to embrace the full benefits of that industrial revolution. And that is why Dr. Bawumia has been very, very keen. Because look, and there's vast amount of literature linking digitization to economic prosperity. Indeed, in today's world, you cannot make progress without digitizing your public service, without formalizing every aspect of your economy through digitization. So it tells you that Dr. Bawumia is a forward-thinking leader. He can see clearly where the world is headed, and he believes that Ghana must be prepared. Many analysts have argued that we missed the Industrial Revolution, we missed all kinds of revolutions. And in 2025, we cannot afford to miss the 4th Industrial Revolution.
Otherwise, we'll be way
Absolutely.
behind.
And so the likes of Dr. Bawumia, signals everybody interested in the development of Ghana that he's the kind of leader that Ghana needs at this critical moment.
Yeah. So just last week, for instance, we celebrated Farmers Day, honoring our farmers, fishermen, those who feed us. Because you can see a doctor once a year, you can go to your dentist once a year. But for the farmers, we see them 3 times a day in the terms of the food that we eat each and every other day. It's like they are very integral, very vital to our economy. So for Dr. Bawumia, how would you say, what strategies does he have to boost agriculture productivity?
Massive investment.
Okay.
If there's one critical area that can deliver jobs, stimulate economic growth, all right, improve our export standards, and by extension, contribute to the stability of our currency, it is agriculture. Part of the reasons why our CD continue to struggle is the import-driven nature of our economy. We import virtually everything that we consume in this country. What that means is that we lack the local capacity to be able to produce what we need. Okay, and so if we have a deliberate policy of government targeting investment, large-scale investment in the agricultural sector, we will be cutting imports significantly and thereby reduce the forest pressure that our CD continued to face since 1957. So Dr. Bawumia's priority, and mind you, when I was talking about his vision on attaining and sustaining macroeconomic environment, I mentioned agriculture, because without it, you cannot attain and sustain the macroeconomic environment. So agriculture is a top priority for him, not just because it can deliver jobs, but also it can help ensure currency stability, because if you're able to produce, I mean, if you take, for instance, chicken, rice, and petroleum products, for instance, that's not related to agri, but I'm just trying to use that to make a point. Okay. We spend in excess of $1 billion importing these things. If we invest crucially into the production of chicken, for instance, and rice and tomatoes, we'll be freeing our economy of the excess demand of about $1 billion just to import chicken and rice into our country. You know, anytime you import rice into the country, what you are also doing is that you are shipping wealth outside the country and bringing unemployment into your country. So it's like you are getting debt for ourselves? Absolutely. Because anytime you import rice, you are increasing your level of unemployment and by extension your level of poverty, and you are making other economies richer by reducing unemployment in their economies and reducing poverty in their economies. Yeah. So for us to be able to make progress, we cannot negotiate agriculture. It has to be a #1 priority. And I would dare say, not just for Dr. Bawumia and the NPP, but for every government that will have in this republic, agri must be a #1 priority for any president seeking to do well for our country.
Yes, one critical aspect as well is the healthcare delivery system. What grand plans does Dr. Bawumia have when it comes to the health
As
sector?
you know, President Akufo-Addo has publicly indicated that Agenda 111 was an idea, you know, suggested to him by Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia during the COVID pandemic, because the COVID-19 pandemic exposed our healthcare system in the country. That we got to the root, to the axiomatic realization that there were many districts in our country without standard health facilities. Okay, and the NPP government took that bold initiative to invest in a historic fashion into health infrastructure. Dr. Bawumia is committing to continue with this Agenda 111, to complete them, and to, get them operationalized, because clearly this government is not giving the indication that it intends to continue with the project.
In the recent budget,
if you look at the allocation,
they said they wanted to start on
the allocation tells you that they
like
cannot,
a number of them. They don't want to do all of them at once. They just want to start.
Even complete them. So, I mean, from the budgetary allocation, you can tell clearly
no, maybe they start with a few and then they complete the rest.
The previous government was doing all at the same time. It's a question of priority. Okay, if you're committed to do that, you will do that. I mean, if you can, allocate money for other, projects, it tells you that you're not prioritizing the Agenda 111. And then, so Dr. Bawumia intends to continue with that. He intends to continue with the massive recruitment of health workers, all right, because it's important that we are able to bring quality and accessible health care to the doorsteps of our people, and he's very much committed to that.
So we talked about energy, we talked about the economy, creating jobs for the people, how digitization also help us to grow and all. For just recently as well, the WASI results were released. And we haven't gotten the chief examiner's report yet, but it looks like the students, there was a massive failure. It caused a lot of hullabaloo. We want to see what exactly happened. So when it comes to the education sector, what kind of reforms is Dr. Bawumia looking at?
Yes, we cannot, we have to prioritize education because the human capital development of our nation is central to innovation. Okay? And without investment, the right investment in education, you will not be able to develop your human capital base, and therefore you would lack the manpower to execute the vision that you have. No vision can succeed without investment in education, and we have demonstrated as a party that at every given opportunity we would continue to expand access to education without compromising quality. So we're the first political party to give true meaning to FQIP. We introduced the school feeding program as a means of encouraging young people to stay in school. And when we came back again under Nana Akufo-Addo, we introduced the free secondary education. We also invested heavily in TVET. For the first time since 1957, TVET got historic investment. Okay, we also prioritized STEM education by the building of new STEM schools across the country. Okay, so we gave education the topmost priority. Indeed, for the 8 years that Akufo-Addo was in power, the highest investment went into education. And it is a trajectory that Dr. Bawumia would continue as president. The question of WASI, I think that what we have to do as a people is to cut out the politicization, look at what the causative factors are. Okay, you know, I've heard people say, well, you know, trying to make political capital out of it by blaming free SHS, some saying that, well, the headmasters were given key performance indicators, and, you know, KPIs can never be a wrong thing. I'm sure you here, you have KPIs to determine how each employee is working. Indeed, it is something that we have to encourage without compromising quality. So the most important thing is for the government to take its time, look at what the issues are, because, I mean, we've had free SHS running since 2017. This is a worst performance. So it cannot be the question of free SHS. I've heard people talk about leakages. Leakages has been...
An poor situation for...
It has been there since, you know, when I was in secondary school, we used to hear about leakages. That's always been there.
Just before we go, since Dr. Bawumia plans to continue with Agenda 111, does that mean he also plans to continue with the One District, One Factory in order to promote like industrialization and job
Industrialization is equally important, but it has to be private sector led. Okay. Like I said, the overall vision of his government is to give to the private sector the opportunity to flourish. Okay. So government will lead the government will create the policy framework, the enabling economic conditions, and the private sector will lead the industrialization process for our nation.
That's our time here on this segment. But just before you go, final message to the delegates and to Ghanaians watching us, why your candidate is the best bet for Ghana.
For us in the New Patriotic Party, I believe that leadership must be grounded in integrity, in sacrifice, in humility, you know, and Dr. Bawumia embodies this. I emphasize integrity all the time because the president, who is the #1 officer of the state, must be a man of integrity before everybody else would follow suit. We cannot afford to elect tenderpreneurs and hand them political power. You know the danger in that? To have a president who has the ambition to make money. You cannot afford such a situation. And Dr. Bawumia is looking for this to help transform our country and nothing more.
Yeah, so Lawyer Agba Yusuf Uhela Omeni, A to Dr. Bawumia, thank you so much
for
expanding on Dr. Bawumia's vision. Wishing you all the best in the coming elections.